Shabbat shalom, everyone. So this morning, I'd like for us to have a bit of a conversation about, oh my goodness, we've got people coming in from all over the place today. Sorry, just people walked in. We've got a visitor coming here from New Jersey, from the East Coast. We've got people coming in from LA. Everybody's coming in. What I want to talk about today is ultimately the concept of pluralism. The concept of pluralism. It's actually something that the conservative movement, I believe, has built itself on. And as we read through this week's Parsha, we see the rebellion of Korach, and we see a breakdown of what I would consider to be pluralistic thinking. One of the sources that Rabbi Ern and I spoke about in our podcast this week is the famous source from Pirkei Avot. These are the arguments or the discussions that are for the sake of heaven, and these are the arguments that are not for the sake of heaven, right? And Korach, our rebellion that we're going to read about today, is the paradigmatic example of an argument not for the sake of heaven. Whereas Hillel and Shammai, and the schools of Hillel and the schools of Shammai, are, in fact, the example of argument for the sake of heaven. So I guess the first question for us to tackle a little bit today is, what was Korach's problem, and why was this an example or not an example of an argument for the sake of heaven? Right? What was Korach's problem according to our text? What did he say? Nobody knows by heart? All right, well, let's look at the text. Who died and left you boss? I like that. Not necessarily the who died part, but the who. Why are you the boss? So let's look. Korach begins on page 860. 860 in our red books. And it starts by saying, now Korach, the son of Yitzhar, son of Kohat, son of Levi, betook himself, along with Datan, Abiram, and the descendants of Reuven, to rise up against Moses, together with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community. So it's not just them. They gathered a whole group together with them. And these were chosen in the assembly. These were men of repute. These were leaders. And they combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far. For all the community are holy, all of them, and the Lord is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above the Lord's congregation?" I guess the first question is, why did they think this, right? And why now? They've been wandering in the desert now for quite a while. They've had all sorts of things already go on. We've had the golden calf. We've had all sorts of things happening. What happened at the end of last week's Parsha that may make Korach and all these people feel like, hey, all of us are holy. We're all the same. Yes. Say that louder again.
The commandment of tzitzit, like we just read aloud in the third paragraph of the Shema.
Yes. At the end of last week's Parsha, right before we get to this story, we read the commandment of the tzitzit. And that commandment isn't given just to the Kohanim, to the priests, or just to the leaders. It is given to everybody, so that we remember the mitzvot, we remain close to God. It is, and especially when you add the blue onto it, the patil techelet, right? It is actually part of the garb, and there are a number of rabbis who argue this. It is part of the garb that the Kohanim, that the priests used to wear. In essence, saying, all of us have this holiness. So, Korach stepped forward and said, well, God just said everyone should put this on. We're all the same. Moses, Aaron, why are you putting yourself above everybody else? Right? That, I think, is the context of what's going on here. But why is this the paradigmatic example of lo l'shamayim, of not for the sake of heaven? And what's interesting is, I want to come at it the other way. I want to look at Hillel and Shammai and see what the rabbis do with Hillel and Shammai. Okay? The Yerushalmi actually says that Hillel and Shammai, to some degree, were responsible for all of the disputes that we have within Jewish tradition. Right? This comes from the Yerushalmi Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, and it says as follows. This comes from Chagiga. Originally, there were no machlokot, there were no disputes in Israel except for on one point. Hillel and Shammai came and made them four. When the students of the house of Shammai and the students of the house of Hillel multiplied, they created more machlokot, more divisions in Israel. And they split into two camps. The ones would declare unclean, and these would declare clean. Furthermore, the situation won't be set right until the time of the Messiah. So here are Hillel and Shammai, according to our Talmud, being responsible for all of the disputes within, all of the disagreements within Jewish tradition. And yet, they're the paradigmatic example of what we should be doing. Why?
I think what they were doing was they were having these machlokets, these sort of religious arguments and debates to get to a higher place of that, of kind of like to figure out the halacha and how it came and to sort of make sense of it all. But there was, I mean, yeah, they kind of had little quips and sometimes they dissed each other a little bit. I mean, it wasn't all like, let's like have this beer summit and talk it out, But there was always this innate, they weren't accusing each other. And here you see Korach and all these other men who presumably had their own agendas that stayed, and they're just coming at Moshe like, you. If they didn't come out with like, well, how about as an alternative, we consider this? And
Okay, so Diana said a couple different things. Let me try to unpack it for those who are listening online as well. There was certainly disagreements between Hillel and Shammai, but there was also, to paraphrase you, a certain amount of respect between the two, even though they had some quips and some comments about the other, right? There was a respect of the other, and they were doing it for the purpose of understanding and getting closer to God. Where ostensibly, the purpose of Korach and his followers, at least according to the rabbis, it was personal power, right? Korach felt that he should be the one, not Aaron, right? And there were a number of rabbis who actually put in Korach's mouth the accusation of nepotism. That Korach was one of the chieftains of the house of tribes of Levi, and here Moses picked his brother. By the way, it wasn't Moses who picked his brother, it was God who picked his brother, but let's just say, right, Moses picked his brother, and if there's nepotism here as opposed to, I'm a Levi too, why can't I be the priest? Why shouldn't I be the one being there? We're all holy. Yeah.
well, there's also this like almost reverse nepotism where you have Datan and Abiram, who were from the tribe of Reuben, who was the firstborn.
Right.
Like, hey,
What about us?
we're the firstborn.
Right, Datan and Abiram were we're from the tribe of Reuben. Shouldn't we be the ones that are the leaders, right? We're the firstborn. We should have some standing, some status. It all came down ultimately, right, to personal power, at least according to the rabbis. And that's the reason that Pirkei Avot says, Lo l'shem shamayim. This was not, their motivation was not for the sake of heaven, right? And what Diana said earlier is, well, yes, they didn't go and have some beer summit and whatever and talk this all out. But the Talmud was very clear, right? I may even have the source here if I can find it really quickly. Yeah, I may not. I may have moved it. But the source from Yevamot actually says very clearly that in spite of all the arguments, and Hillel and Shammai had arguments on status issues, right? Not just, is this kosher, is this not kosher? But on, is this marriage a valid marriage? Can this person then be married to a Kohen or not, right? Real issues that affect families. And yet, in spite of those differences, the Talmud says, the men of Shammai married the women of Hillel and vice versa. In spite of these issues, right, that could really play into how we live our lives, they still actually respected one another enough that their followers would marry each other. Now bring that into today when, disagreements, we can hardly talk to each other. Right? Let alone marry each other. And by the way, there were quite a number of marriages that suffered and broke up because of the political challenges in these last years, where it just got to a point where they said, nope, I can't do it anymore. Usually families got involved as well, but it is a real issue. So now we come then to the concept of pluralism. What does pluralism mean? What does pluralism actually mean? It depends who you ask. Okay, well, I'm asking you. What does pluralism mean? It's not all kumbaya. It's not easy. That's true.
I think it's like trying to coexist. I'm thinking of that like nice bumper sticker that people have on their cars, and trying to exist in the same maybe community or family or whatever your little circle is or larger, with these different beliefs, and saying, okay, and so like I'm thinking about maybe a camp that is pluralistic.
Right.
And they try to accommodate or understand.
So Diana is saying that pluralism is an attempt to coexist in spite of all of the differences that are there. Maybe like a summer camp where we try to accommodate, we try to make sure that everybody can be there. The challenge, by the way, with that is we get ourselves into trouble, right? We get ourselves into trouble where we say pluralism means we're going to make the most stringent happy, right? Because the most stringent has the most rules, and therefore the less stringent can follow the rules of the most stringent. So for example, right, we can talk about kashrut, we can talk about women's status in Judaism. When communities come together and you're trying to have an orthodox viewpoint and a progressive viewpoint together with women, right? The typical answer we get ourselves to is, well, we just won't have women involved because both progressive and orthodox accept men, but only the progressive accept women. Therefore, the answer is to only have men. That is actually not a pluralistic viewpoint, right? Because it is unequal. It does not allow for both ideas to exist simultaneously. And to me, pluralism is about multiple and often contradictory ideas existing simultaneously within a community. That's what pluralism is. And by the way, that's why pluralism is so hard. Because you don't have to agree. Pluralism does not say you have to agree. But you need to accept the fact that that differing opinion from yours has as much right to exist and to be there as yours does. And you can argue against it, and you can disagree with it with every breath to the day of your last day of your life. But it's got a right to be there. Go ahead, Sophia. It is incredibly difficult to do. It is incredibly difficult to do. And the conservative movement throughout its history has struggled with the ups and downs of being pluralistic, right? Ultimately, the way that we've done it, and I think, by the way, it is the right way to do it, is it allows for communities to differ from one another within the movement, right? Now, I would say at this point in time, 98% of conservative synagogues are egalitarian. There are some that are still struggling with it. I was just in New Jersey. There's one of my colleagues of a synagogue in New Jersey. They're still struggling with it. So what they do is they have some services that are, like some weeks that are egalitarian services where men and women can do it, and some weeks that are non-egalitarian. But 98% of our synagogues now are egalitarian. But for a long time, that wasn't the case. And the conservative movement, when they said women can be counted in a minyan, and women can lead services and read from the Torah, didn't make it a requirement, but they said, you as a community can choose. And there are going to be some communities that say no, and there are going to be some communities that say yes. And so for many, many decades within the conservative movement, there was a mix, and some synagogues were egalitarian and some synagogues weren't. As a matter of fact, when I was a student rabbi in Huntsville, Alabama, when I got there, we were not egalitarian. When I left 3 years later, we were. I helped them through that process of becoming egalitarian. It wasn't because of me necessarily. They were already wanting to do that, but I just happened to be the rabbi that helped them manage that process of change. There was I'll give you another example, right? Many of you know that 2 weeks ago, last week, I don't even remember when it was, it's all a blur. I was in New Jersey, right? And I was studying as part of my program to learn how to do Jewish divorce, right? My program on Gittin. And the conservative movement, the Joint Beit Din, while we were there actually, got together and made a huge decision that allows now women to be witnesses for divorce. And it's a huge, huge decision. And we're going to talk about, I'm actually, next in the fall, my class that I'm going to be teaching is going to be on egalitarianism in Judaism. And we're going to look at all of these different issues and the problems and why some people feel that it's okay and why some people feel that it's not okay. But this was a big step. But again, they didn't do it as a chiyuv, as an obligation that everyone must accept. What they said is it's a heter, it's a permission. And there will be some Mesadri Gittin who will use women as witnesses, and there'll be others who choose not to. And it is difficult. And even in that Beit Din that made that decision, it was not a unanimous decision. There were some rabbis who spoke against that. And that's part of being a pluralistic movement, and what I would also say is a pluralistic religion. Look at the Talmud, right? The Talmud goes to a lot of trouble to make sure that all the minority opinions are there because they matter. Even though we know that's not the law, that's not what we're going to follow, you're wrong, right? They're there because they matter. And it's, even though we as a people have chosen to go down one path, it doesn't mean that the other path is evil or wrong even. We have to make a choice sometimes. So The challenge with Korach is Korach was ostensibly arguing for pluralism, but he actually wasn't. Right? He was trying to say we're all good. We can all be Kohanim. But in fact, he was saying, no, it has to be the way that I'm thinking about this, as opposed to understanding that there are multiple possibilities and multiple ways to think about it. Now, obviously, at the end of this, God steps in, and that's a game changer for all of this, right? It doesn't, we don't have that today. So we have to find our way through it without God as an arbiter of what is going to happen and what isn't going to happen moving forward. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, what I just wanted to bring up also about Talmud is they talk about, in many of the tractates, the reason for the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash was because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred.
Yeah.
And when we get into this situation when we're trying to navigate how to evolve Jewishly through, especially in the conservative movement, which is also known as the Masorti,
Mm-hmm.
is the transmission of
The traditional movement, yeah.
it becomes very difficult. And I've seen, actually, in my mother's congregation in New Jersey that has been struggling for over 30 years with egalitarianism and the sinat chinam, and that ultimately it can implode from within if it's not addressed. L'shem shamayim.
Correct. It is not so much what you're arguing about, although that does pertain, right? It's how you're doing it. And a lot of people have come back and said, Korach did it wrong. There were a lot of ways to come and to bring this to Moshe's attention. The way he did it by creating a rebellion did it wrong. I just want to leave you, as I was studying through this and I was looking at it, I was reminded of these sections in Yevamot. It's incredible, the disputes and the disagreements, fundamentally, that people had, and yet they were okay letting go of their own point of view for the sake of someone else, right? It starts by talking about Hillel and Shammai and that you shouldn't have different courts. You shouldn't have a court of Hillel and a court of Shammai in the same city, because that's going to create conflict. It's going to create problems, right? You should sort of have this city, okay, if it's following Hillel's view, it follows Hillel's view. In another city, if it's following Shammai's view, it's following Shammai's view. But the Gemara goes into other places. It says here, come in here, in the locale of Rabbi Eliezer, where his ruling was followed. They would cut down trees on Shabbat, to prepare charcoal from them, to fashion the iron tools to circumcise a child on Shabbat. Let's unpack that for a second. Cut down trees, prepare charcoal, fashion iron. All problems on Shabbat. All expressly forbidden on Shabbat. Circumcise a child on Shabbat. Are you allowed to do that? Yes. You have to, as a matter of fact. Right? And there are ways that you do that to try and keep Shabbat. But you must, right? If the 8th day falls on Shabbat, you circumcise on Shabbat. If the 8th day falls on Yom Kippur, you have a bris on Yom Kippur. You don't have to feed everybody, but you have a bris on Yom Kippur. Okay? The only thing that postpones a bris is the health of the child. That's it. The only thing that postpones a bris is the health of the child. Otherwise, you do it on the 8th day. So there is a machloket, there's a dispute, right, between whether or not if you're doing a permitted act, other forbidden acts become permitted in order to let you do that. Some rabbis say, no, you have to have done all of that beforehand. The only thing you can do is the circumcision on Shabbat. But you needed to make the tools beforehand. You needed to do everything you did, get it all ready. Mohalim today will very often, if they know they're going to do a bris on Shabbat and they're Shabbat observant, they will bring all of their stuff to the place where the bris is going to happen before Shabbat, leave it there, and then arrive on Shabbat so they don't have to bring it with them on Shabbat. Okay? But other people argue, no. If you are doing something that is permitted, any of the other actions are going to now be permitted for you to be able to do that. What an incredible dispute. And then, not to create problems in this community, but just so you know, the Braita adds, in the locale of Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, they would eat poultry with milk. Right? It says it in the Talmud. They ate poultry with milk. And yet, we don't do that. Right? And not only was it okay to have these different ways, they were recorded. They were recorded. In most histories that we have, we don't record what we disagree with. We only record the things that agree with our position. And so you could very easily say that the Talmud, the editor, the redactor of the Talmud, is only going to record those things that agree with their position. But on the contrary, they make sure that all of these positions are there. That is pluralism. And some people even go so far, we're running out of time, I don't want to go too much longer, but the Gemara continues, right? This is in Yevamot 14, for anyone who wants to look at it, and says that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, one said that you couldn't move a lamp on Shabbat, the other said that you could. But depending on what school of thought this rabbi was in, he would change his personal practice so as not to embarrass anybody. So not only did he say there's two different perspectives, and I may have one and disagree with the other, he said there's two different perspectives, and in respect for both, I'm going to change my practice depending on where I'm at. Right? If I'm going to a synagogue that is not egalitarian, I'm going to respect that. It's my choice whether I want to go there or not. But if I'm there, I'm going to respect that. That is their choice. By the same token, I expect people, when they come here and they see that we are a fully egalitarian synagogue, that they respect that. Or choose not to come. That's another option. Pluralism is not about agreement, it's about respect. It's about accepting the fact that there are people who have different opinions than you, and that's okay. And boy, do we need to remember that in today's day and age. Shabbat shalom, everyone.